He reached across the table and picked up my mother's ring like it was a piece of costume jewelry she'd found at a yard sale. Not my ring, my mother's ring. The thin gold band with the tiny sapphire chip that my mom had worn every single day of her adult life until the morning she couldn't lift her hand anymore. The ring my brother had brought to the reunion because he thought it would be a nice gesture, displaying it in that little velvet box he borrowed from somewhere, setting it out like a centerpiece between the salad bowls and the bread basket. And his fiancé's mother just picked it up, turned it over, held it toward the window light. "Oh," she said in that voice people use when they're trying to be polite about something they find disappointing. "How sweet. Vintage." She said vintage the way some people say secondhand. I was sitting right there, 2 feet away with a glass of iced tea I hadn't touched because my hands had gone very still the moment she reached out. My brother Theo was at the other end of the long porch table, laughing at something his future father-in-law had said. He hadn't seen it. Nobody had seen it except me and his fiancée Brianna, who looked down at her plate like she'd suddenly found her salad very interesting. I should tell you about the reunion first, so you understand what kind of weekend this was shaping up to be. My family does this every few years, rents a big house somewhere and spends a long weekend pretending we're closer than we actually are. This time it was a lake house in the Adirondacks. 3 stories, wraparound porch, the kind of place that looks effortless but costs more per night than most people's rent. Theo had suggested it, which surprised me at the time, because Theo is a high school history teacher and had never in his life suggested anywhere that cost more than $40 a plate. But then he'd gotten engaged to Brianna 6 months ago, and Brianna's family had very particular ideas about what a proper family gathering looked like. Her parents, I'll call them the Aldrides because that's their name and I'm not going to soften it, had driven up from Connecticut in a car that probably cost more than my first apartment. Her father, Stuart, was some kind of senior VP at a financial firm. Her mother, Renata, had the kind of posture you only get from a lifetime of being told you are the most important person in every room you enter. They were not unkind, exactly. They were something more precise than unkind. They were evaluating. From the moment they arrived Friday evening, I felt it. The way Renata's eyes did a quick scan of whatever you were wearing before she smiled at you. The way Stuart asked what you did with exactly the right pause before the word did, like he was bracing himself for bad news. They had a daughter, my brother's fiancé, and a son, a guy named Prescott who was 26 and worked in private equity and wore boat shoes without socks, even though it was barely 60 degrees outside. Then there was me. I'm 31. I own a small business, a financial consulting firm actually, though small is doing some work in that sentence that I'll get to later. I live alone in a 1-bedroom in Brooklyn that I've had for 4 years. I drive a 7-year-old Subaru that I keep meaning to trade in. I was wearing, that Friday evening, a plain linen shirt and dark jeans because I'd driven 6 hours and hadn't felt like changing. Renata looked at me the way she'd looked at my mother's ring. Politely. Briefly. Moving on. Saturday morning was fine. We did the things you do, made too much coffee, walked the dock, took the kayaks out. Theo was happy in that loose, easy way he gets when things are going well for him, and seeing him like that made me happy too, even with the low hum of discomfort that had settled over me like weather. He loved Brianna. That was obvious and real. She softened around him in a way she didn't around anyone else. I was rooting for them. It was Saturday lunch when things started. We were all on the porch, 12 people around that long table, and Prescott had started talking about his firm. He did this with the confidence of someone who had never once considered that the topic might not be interesting to everyone present. He talked about deals. He talked about markets. He talked about a conference he'd attended in Zurich in a way that mentioned Zurich twice more than necessary. And then, because conversations like this have a gravitational pull, it became a general discussion about finance and investment and who was doing what in that world. Stuart mentioned a fund he was involved with. Renata mentioned a property they were developing in Scottsdale. Prescott mentioned his bonus in the specific way people mention bonuses when they want you to know the number without actually saying the number. Then someone, I think it was my aunt, bless her, asked me what I'd been up to lately. I run a consulting firm, I said. Financial advisory, mostly small to mid-sized businesses. Prescott nodded the way you nod when someone tells you they play recreational soccer. That's great, he said. Good for you. Local stuff mostly? We work with clients in about 15 states, I said. Oh, he picked up his fork. Cute. Cute. I let it go. I took a sip of my iced tea and I let it go because it was my brother's engagement weekend and I was not going to be the reason it went sideways. I smiled at my aunt and asked her about her garden. But then came the ring. Renata had been holding it for a full 30 seconds before my brother noticed and glanced over with a smile, proud, wanting her to appreciate it. That was our mother's, he said. We brought it hoping Brianna might want to incorporate it somehow. Into the wedding, maybe. Renata set it back in the box gently. Precisely. Of course, she said. That's a lovely thought. She looked at Brianna. We'll think about it. We'll think about it. I watched my brother's smile stay in place through what I can only describe as effort. He was used to people receiving things graciously. He'd probably been rehearsing that moment in his head for weeks. And she'd taken it and set it down like a bid she was considering. I excused myself after lunch, walked down to the dock, and sat with my feet hanging over the edge, watching a loon cut across the far end of the lake. I called my assistant, Junie, not because there was anything urgent, but because I needed to hear a normal voice. How's the family thing? She asked. Instructive, I said. She laughed. She knows me well enough not to ask follow-up questions when I use words like that. Here's the thing about my business that I hadn't mentioned at lunch, partly because it hadn't come up organically, and partly because I genuinely don't lead with it. I started my firm 6 years ago with 2 clients and a shared office space in Queens. I'd spent the 4 years before that working for a larger advisory firm, learning everything I could, saving everything I earned. When I left to start my own thing, people, including, gently, my brother, wondered if I was being impulsive. It didn't look like much at first. It looked like a woman in her mid-20s with a laptop and a lot of ambition, and a business plan that she'd rewritten 11 times. What it had become, 6 years later, was something different. 43 active clients, a team of 9, including Junie. Contracts with 3 regional bank networks who referred their commercial clients to us when those clients needed advisory work the banks themselves weren't equipped to handle. Annual revenue that would have surprised Prescott considerably if he'd known it. One of those bank network contracts, the largest one, the one that had taken me 2 years to negotiate and that had genuinely changed the shape of what my firm could do, was with a regional bank called Harlow Capital Partners. Harlow Capital Partners was Stuart Aldridge's employer. Not in an abstract, giant corporation way where thousands of people work there and nobody knows anybody. Harlow had about 300 employees. Stuart was one of 4 senior VPs. I had met with their commercial lending team 6 times over the course of our negotiation. I had signed a contract with their executive director that had Stuart Aldridge's division head's signature 3 lines above mine on the approval chain. He did not know this. I was almost certain he did not know this, because when we'd been introduced Friday evening and I'd said my firm's name, there had been 0 recognition in his face, just the polite blank of someone filing away information they don't expect to need. I sat on that dock for a long time. I want to be honest about what I was feeling, because it wasn't simple. Part of it was anger, the clean, uncomplicated kind that comes from being dismissed by people who don't know what they're dismissing. But underneath that was something older and less comfortable. I had spent years building something real, and I still had moments at tables like that one where I felt like the girl who needed to prove herself, where the gap between what I'd built and how I was perceived could knock the wind out of me if I let it. I didn't want to let it. I also didn't want to perform gratitude for being underestimated. I wanted something in between, and I wasn't sure what that looked like yet. I went back up to the house for dinner. Saturday dinner was the main event of the weekend. Theo had arranged a catered meal, round tables set up in the great room, candles, the whole thing. He put real thought into it, I could tell. He wanted the families to feel like families. I sat next to my aunt and across from Brianna's older cousin, a quiet woman named Faye who worked in landscape architecture and seemed as exhausted by the Aldrich family dynamic as I was. We talked about plants for a while. It was the best conversation I'd had all weekend. At some point, the table talk turned to the wedding plans. Venue, date, all of it. Brianna and Theo had chosen a place in the Hudson Valley, a restored farmhouse that did events. Beautiful, apparently. They were both excited about it. I was genuinely happy listening to them. Then Renata said to Brianna, but for the table, of course, we want to make sure it reflects both families properly. The right image. She said image the way some people say investment, like it was something you managed. And then, tilting her head very slightly in my direction, it can be tricky when family situations are a bit uneven. The table didn't quite go quiet. It was more like the air pressure changed slightly. My aunt looked at her water glass. Faye went very still. Theo, across the table, had a look on his face that I recognized. The look of someone trying to figure out how bad this is and whether they can stop it. I smiled, not a strained smile, a real one actually, because in that moment something in me had made a decision. Uneven, I repeated pleasantly. What do you mean by that? Renata blinked. She hadn't expected the question to come back to her so cleanly. Oh, I just mean different backgrounds, different levels of. She waved her hand. Establishment. It's nothing personal, of course. Of course, I said. Can I ask, what is it you think I do exactly for work? She looked at Stuart briefly. You mentioned consulting, I think. Small business work? Financial advisory consulting, yes. Do you happen to know a firm called Alderman and Voss Group? A small pause. No, I don't think so. What about Meridian Grain Partners? Or Castleton Home Supply? Stuart was looking at me now. Something had shifted in his expression. Not recognition yet, more like attention. We advised Meridian through a $4.2 million refinancing last year, I said conversationally. Castleton we've worked with for 3 years, helped them restructure before they expanded into 4 new locations. Alderman and Voss we brought in on a complex partnership dispute that kept them from a lawsuit that would have cost both sides more than anyone wanted to think about. I paused. Those are 3 of the clients referred to us through the Harlow Capital Commercial Lending Division. Your division, I think, Stuart, if I'm remembering the org chart right. Stuart set his fork down. Your executive director signed the original contract, I said. I think you were CC'd on the announcement email. My firm's name is Callaway Advisory. I'm the founder. The silence this time was real. I watched Stuart do the math. I could see it happening. The name clicking, the timeline assembling, the understanding arriving that the woman he'd mentally filed under, not relevant, was the principal on a contract his division had spent months negotiating and had considered a meaningful win for their commercial referral program. Prescott had gone very quiet on the other side of the table. The boat shoes were not helping him now. I wasn't done, but I want to be clear, I was not performing. I wasn't savoring it the way you savor something when you've been planning it. I was just done being uneven. I don't say any of that to create a moment, I said. I say it because your daughter is going to marry my brother, and I'd like us to start from an accurate picture of who's sitting at this table, on both sides. Brianna, for the first time all weekend, looked directly at me, not the quick, polite glance she'd been giving everyone. A real look. Something moved behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something closer to recognition, like she'd been waiting to see who I actually was and had just gotten her answer. Theo was looking at me too. He wasn't saying anything. I knew that look. He was proud of me and a little undone by me simultaneously, which has been his experience of me for most of our lives. Renata said, well, and then, after a moment, that's quite impressive. It was a gracious recovery, I'll give her that. What happened after was quieter than you might expect. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful apology, no moment where Renata admitted she'd been small. What there was, a long evening where something had recalibrated. Stuart asked me several genuine questions about the Harlow contract and what my team's process looked like. Prescott talked a lot less. Faye, the landscape architect cousin, quietly refilled my wine glass and said under her breath, "Thank you for that." After dinner, when the candles had burned low and half the table had moved to the couches, Brianna found me on the porch. Just the two of us, the lake invisible in the dark but audible, small waves against the dock. "I didn't know," she said, "about your firm. About any of it." "You didn't have a reason to," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "My mom can be," she started. "You don't have to explain her to me." "I was going to say difficult," she said, "even to me." I looked at her. She was being honest. That mattered. "I think you and Theo are going to be good," I said, and I meant it. Not as a consolation or a pivot, but because I'd watched them together all weekend and it was the truest thing I'd observed. She nodded. Then she said, quietly, "The ring is beautiful, by the way. The sapphire. I want to wear it if that's okay. I was going to tell Theo, but I wanted to ask you first." Something went loose in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. "It would make me very happy," I said. She went inside. I stayed on the porch a while longer, listening to the lake. The drive home Sunday was 5.5 hours, and I spent most of it thinking. The way you do when something has settled, but not yet fully taken shape. The anger had gone quiet, which was good. What was left was something more useful. A reminder, maybe, that I'd spent years building something real, in the background, without needing anyone to see it. That the not seeing wasn't a judgment of the work. It was just distance, which closes eventually if you let it. I thought about my mother. The ring had been on her hand at my college graduation, my first office opening, the Sunday morning brunch I threw the year I signed the Harlow contract, when it was just her and me and Theo and a lot of mediocre scrambled eggs. And she'd said, "I'm proud of you, Nora," in the particular voice she reserved for the moments she really meant it. I thought about Junie, who had kept my schedule running that whole weekend without a single non-urgent text. I thought about the 9 people on my team who had built something with me. I thought about Brianna asking permission, the sapphire against her hand someday. I was 40 miles outside of the city when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. "Theo." I let it ring through to voicemail, then played it when I hit traffic on the bridge. "Hey." Long exhale. "So that was a weekend. I just wanted to call and say I knew, okay? I've always known what you built. I just didn't know how to make the people who hadn't earned it yet understand it. You did that better than I could have." A pause. "Also, Brianna really likes you." Like, really likes you. Which matters to me more than any of the other stuff, honestly. Another pause. "Drive safe. Call me when you're home." I sat in traffic on the bridge with the city in front of me and the late afternoon light doing something unreasonable to the water below, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The hard parts and the good parts, and the parts that were both at once. Then the car started moving and I drove home. I've thought a lot about that porch table since that weekend. The candles, the salad bowls, the little velvet box sitting between them like it was waiting to see what kind of people we all were. What I keep coming back to isn't the moment Stuart set down his fork, or the way Prescott went quiet, or even Renata's gracious recovery that I'll admit I respected a little. What I keep coming back to is the 6 years before any of that, the shared office in Queens, the 11 drafts of a business plan, the Sunday mornings I spent building something that nobody in that room had thought to ask about. There's a version of that weekend where I stay quiet, where I smile through cute and uneven and let the assumptions settle like dust, because making a scene wasn't worth it and keeping the peace was easier. I've done that version before. A lot of people do, and I understand it. I really do, because sometimes silence is wisdom, and sometimes it's self-protection, and it's not always easy to know which one you're choosing. But I think the thing that finally made me speak wasn't anger. It was something closer to integrity. A sense that allowing someone to build a false picture of you when you have the facts to correct it is its own kind of dishonesty. Not the loud dishonesty of lying, but the quiet dishonesty of letting yourself be erased because the room made it easier. Nora, and I mean myself when I say that, the version of me sitting at that table had spent years doing the actual work, not performing it, not broadcasting it. Just doing it client by client, contract by contract, early morning by early morning. That's what I mean when I think about what it really takes to build something. It's not the announcement. It's not the room where people finally see you. It's the 10,000 hours before the room when nobody's watching and you do it anyway. That's the part that actually makes you who you are. The character that forms in the quiet, the judgment that sharpens through hard decisions, the endurance that doesn't announce itself. What I find interesting about cause and effect, not in any mystical sense, just in the plain observable sense, is that the choices you make in private tend to show up eventually in public. Stuart had unknowingly signed off on a contract with my firm because the work had earned it. Brianna had asked permission about the ring because she'd sensed something real in me worth respecting. Theo had left that voicemail because 31 years of watching his sister work had given him something to be proud of. None of those things happened because of that dinner. They happened because of everything that came before it. I think about Brianna asking if she could wear my mother's ring. That small, careful question. The sapphire that had been on my mother's hand at every moment that mattered. There's something right about it ending up with someone who understood that you should ask. Who understood that some things have weight you don't assume. The people who dismiss you aren't always villains. Sometimes they're just people who haven't been given a reason to look closer. The answer to that isn't resentment. Resentment is expensive and it doesn't build anything. The answer is to keep building. To stay honest about who you are. To correct the record when it matters, calmly, without cruelty, and then let the work speak the rest. That's what I drove home thinking about, 40 miles outside the city, in traffic on the bridge, the light doing something unreasonable to the water. The work speaks. You just have to keep doing it long enough for the room to go quiet.